Hi, my name is Gail Flax, and I am the Jewish Community Relations Council co-chair of the newly formed Combating Hate Task Force of the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater. Wendy Arbach and I felt it pertinent to lead the newly formed JCRC Combating Hate Task Force to educate about the history and the dangers of anti-Semitism and work in collaboration with the Holocaust Commission of the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater. Our goal is to mobilize the Jewish and broader community to combat anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry, and hate in all forms. The Tidewater JCRC is thrilled to be partnering on today's event with the Holocaust Commission and the Simon Family JCC's Lee and Bernard Jaffe Family Jewish Book Festival. Today's conversation on freedom of speech could not be timelier and more relevant. We welcome essayist, novelist, and law professor Thane Rosenbaum. Thane's articles, reviews, and essays appear frequently in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times, CNN, and the Daily Beast, and other national publications. He also serves as a legal analyst for CBS News Radio and can be seen regularly on various cable news shows. He also moderates the talk show at the 92nd Street Y, an annual series on culture, world events, and politics. He has given public lectures around the world. He is a distinguished university professor at Touro College, where he directs the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society. Rosenbaum is the author of Payback, The Case for Revenge, and The Myth of Moral Justice, Why Our Legal System Fails to Do What's Right. And he has published 5 novels. Following the discussions, we will take your questions. Please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, please point your mouse at the bottom of the Zoom screen and you will see it in the middle of the lower bar. Thank you, Thane, for joining the Tidewater community today. I now turn the program over to my JCRC Combating Hate Task Force co-chair, Wendy Arbach, who will moderate today's discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail, and welcome, Thane, to Hampton Roads, even though it's virtual. We're really excited to have you today. I don't know if most of the people that interview actually read the book, but I did, and it was great, really accessible, and I look forward to talking to you about it. So I just want to start, I'm just going to jump in. Free speech is one of the most hallowed rights in this country. I think you call it in the book a robust right under the First Amendment. But over the years, and most recently, it has been interpreted and invoked sometimes beyond recognition. And, from everything from, kind of what becomes hate speech to not wearing a mask. I mean, it goes all over the place. And it's gotten especially like this since we've become a lot more polarized. And we've seemed to have abdicated a lot of our personal responsibility about what we actually say. But I know that this is not what the intention of the founding fathers when they were writing the Constitution. So I thought we could start by, if you could give us a little background on what were they thinking when they thought about freedom of speech and where they placed it, and what their intention was for it moving forward.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. That was actually a wonderful starting question. But before I answer it, I want to thank you and Gail and the others of the Tidewater Jewish community for inviting me virtually into your state and your homes, your communities. Maybe there'll be another time that we'll do this and I'll get to actually see you all. But I'm grateful that I have this opportunity to have this talk with you today, Wendy. Well, the founding fathers would be shocked by what we've done with freedom of speech. It would be utterly unrecognizable to them. First of all, freedom of speech in the Bill of Rights was an afterthought. It was not originally in the first drafts of the First Amendment. They were mostly interested with freedom of the press and freedom of religion, then maybe freedom of assembly. Speech only shows up because a few states, Pennsylvania, I think in New York, put speech in their state constitutions. So Madison and Hamilton were sort of pressured into adding it. So that's interesting, because what you said before is quite correct. Speech is the signature right in our Bill of Rights. Everyone, if you ask them, what does the Constitution say? They always say, well, it has freedom of speech, right? You know, there are many of the Bill of Rights people don't even know about at all, but it's the one right that both liberals and conservatives purportedly agree in without any question. So much so that we are an outlier when compared to other liberal democracies around the world. And hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about that as well. But they understood freedom of speech as the public square. Remember, this was the 18th century, Wendy. There was no internet. Even newspapers were, not that commonly available. By the way, and there wasn't literacy around the country, right? So think about how they presented information, how people got information. They were thinking about soapboxes and public squares where people come and talk about ideas, and even if they need to criticize the government in order to make the government better decision makers, right? The idea was to advance ideas in culture, art, politics, to participate in representative democracy, to be an engaged citizen, and in the flow of conversation, literally to be educated by the government and to educate the government. The fact that in the last, since the 1960s, we think freedom of speech means that you can burn a cross on an African American's lawn. By the way, the Supreme Court is very clear, you can't. Or that neo-Nazis can march on a small community of Holocaust survivors in Skokie, Illinois. You can, actually, and it's been done. It was done in 1977. In your state, the fact that you can march in camouflage fatigues to prevent or to protest the removal of a statue of a Confederate general, and march in a menacing way and repeat a slogan, Jews will not replace us, to intimidate other people. The founding fathers would be appalled by this, utterly shocked because of what I just told you. None of those things advance society. None of them increase our knowledge of art, culture, politics. None of them lead to better decision-making for the government. It's just pure hating another group. That's all it is. Our Supreme Court has repeatedly told us, in my view, lied to us. So I hate to sound like Donald Trump, but no, literally, this happened in the 1960s. In my view, it's a pathology. Your community should know that everything you're hearing from Thane Rosenbaum is the minority position, right? So if any of this is interesting to you, if you reject what I'm saying, you're in good company, because most Americans don't believe what I'm talking about. They think that what's really great about the First Amendment is that we can pummel each other and cause hurt and damage to each other with impunity, that we could insult, humiliate, treat like garbage other human beings. Now, let me just say, the other liberal democracies around the world that all started around the same time, 18th century, all read the same books by Locke, Rousseau, Hume, Thomas Jefferson, right? All the founding philosophers of liberal democracies. None of them, and let me repeat this, none of them would ever allow Nazis to march on a community, forget Holocaust survivors, anyone. If you're in Austria or Germany, you know that if your group of neo-Nazis wants to march, you will be marched straight to jail, where you belong. Where else should you be but jail? The idea that in 1977, the Supreme Court didn't even want to hear the case that granted a permit for Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois. By the way, people know this, at the time, Skokie, Illinois, a little suburb of Chicago, had the highest percentage of Holocaust survivors per capita in the United States. The Nazis knew where to go, right? They knew where to go. Here's where we're really, and their leaflets said in bold print, we are coming to get you, right? And other leaflets said, since the Holocaust Commission is sponsoring this, you should know this information. I think it's useful. The other leaflet said, wherever there are Jews, there are Jew haters. This was their marketplace of ideas. This is the best writing that they could do. And that, of course, the Supreme Court didn't even hear that case because it was so obvious that the neo-Nazis should have such rights. The Austrians and the Germans were laughing at Illinois, laughing. They were saying, what kind of morons are Americans that they think that the Nazis should actually be able to march in front of Holocaust survivors? It's bananas, right? Who would think that? Yeah, you can do that. In the United States, in my case, the neo-Nazi case, Collin versus Smith, gets a lot of attention in the book because I think it sort of represents when things went off the rails, where we really had a very different understanding of the First Amendment from what the founding fathers imagined. But it's not even actually my favorite case that makes my case. Snyder versus Phelps, not that long ago, 10, 15 years. There's a church group in Kansas. They are very upset that gays, homosexuals, are allowed to serve in the military. It's very upsetting to them. It's so upsetting to them that they travel around the country to the funerals of dead servicemen, get a permit. Of course, they deserve a permit. And stand within, 100 feet, whatever the distance is required, holding up signs saying, God hates fags, God hates you, thank God for 9/11. Did you hear what I just said? This is the signs. So a man who was saying goodbye to his son, who I think it was either Mr. Phelps or Mr. Snyder, I can't remember who he was, Snyder versus Phelps, he sued the church for emotional distress. You took away my one opportunity to say goodbye to my son, right? The Supreme Court, a local jury, state court jury, gave him millions of dollars of damages for the harm. The Supreme Court reversed 8-1, only Alito, in a very smug, arrogant way, told Americans, you obviously don't know what the free speech clause means. And by the way, you know what the outcome was? The father had to pay the legal teams for the legal services for the church. They actually paid the damage. He paid them, right? I don't know what to say. 8-1. So you can decide. You could say, of course, speech is so important. Of course, that if you don't like gay oh, by the way, it's important to know, not that it matters, the boy who was buried, he's not gay. None of the kids are gay. They just go to the funerals of dead Marines. They don't care. They want to send a message. Their message is, this is why you died. You were killed in combat, but it's really God punishing you for a government that would allow homosexuals to serve in the military.
And actually, that's a good jumping off point, because one of the things that separates us from also Europeans is that they include dignity in they mention dignity in their constitutions, and this is also a big point in your book.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because that also ties back into emotional damages for emotional, damage and versus physical. But I'd love for you to start to maybe talk a little bit about why we don't have dignity, why it's not really mentioned specifically in the Constitution, and how that kind of separates us from other Western European legal systems and decisions.
Wendy, you're so good at this, and thank you for reading. And no, seriously, thank you for reading the book so deeply. I'm very flattered. Oh, really? You found the right transition. You got me back into a good groove. So nicely positioned. Yeah, it's worse than you even described it. It's not sort of mentioned. It doesn't exist. The word human dignity or dignity appears nowhere in our founding documents. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights or the amendments to the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't exist. If you will look at the German Constitution, the French Constitution, the UK Constitution, dignity is not just mentioned once, it's mentioned all over the place, everywhere. Human dignity matters. Israel, really good example, liberal democracy, the only one in the Middle East by miles. They have free speech. It's implicit. They don't have a constitution. They have something called basic laws. That's essentially, think about it as their Bill of Rights.
Mhm.
There was some thought that eventually they would collapse the basic laws into a constitution. That may happen. Remember, Israel's still a very young country. Israel doesn't even have a basic law on free speech. It's obvious they have it, but it's not there. You know what they have? Basic law number 5, Wendy? Dignity. Human dignity. So yes, that is one of the problems, and why they look at us and why we exist as an outlier when it comes to free speech, is because our founding fathers never thought that human dignity, mutual respect, civilized discourse, right? The basic idea that what does it mean to be a citizen? One of my favorite quotes in the book is from Lyndon Johnson. And he said, this was during the civil rights era. He said, "A man has a right to leave his house in the morning with his children without being humiliated." Yeah, he's right. A father should not have to leave the house, take his kids to school, and see a cross that was burned on their lawn. No, he shouldn't have to explain that.
And that in turn, doesn't that kind of inform how cases are heard in the culture of what the Supreme Court and all of the other courts, about how they view the law?
Well, I mean, yes, I think you're right. Implicitly, what they're really saying is, we're not worried about the harm that comes to the listener. We're really, really focused on the right that the speaker has, a right that overrides all other values, pretty much. I mean, there are prescribable categories it's not like we don't have any speech regulation. Of course, we all know you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. We know that libel and slander are prescribed. That's not free speech. We know obscenity is prescribed. Doesn't benefit from First Amendment safeguards. There's a case called the incitement of imminent lawlessness. Means I can't make a rabble-rousing speech and tell everyone, go kill the members of the press or go kill this other community, and everyone goes and does it, and I go home instead and get a sandwich. And I can't then say, well, I wasn't there. I didn't kill anybody. I just said some things. I have free speech. I went home. I wasn't going to be involved in any violence. No, that you don't have the right to free speech to engage people in imminent lawlessness. No, you can't. But for the most part, we side with the speaker over the listener. We deprive what I would call listeners of basic foundational rights of citizenship, which means to feel that they are full valued members and participants in society, and that they're not faced with signs that say "go home towelheads" or say the N-word or kike or anything else that is so derogatory that it actually causes harm and deprives people of equality and citizenship, not just before the law, but before the world. We don't have that here.
No, and which leads me to ask you about hate speech versus hate crime.
Good question.
I think sometimes people conflate the two. They think, oh, and that was one thing that I found really interesting, because you think that they're one and the same, or they meld together, but they actually don't, do they?
They almost have nothing in common. Hate crimes, which we have, not hate. We don't outlaw hate speech, but hate crimes they're done in an interesting way. They're technically not crimes on their own, right? They're crimes that are appendages to other crimes. So, for instance, you can't go to the prosecutor's office in your local state and say, someone said the following that did something. Isn't that a hate crime? The answer is no, it isn't, because that would be, we don't punish speech, right? However, if you do commit a crime, and while you're committing the crime, you're pounding away in an African American's head with a baseball bat, which is assault and battery, right? And while you're doing it, you use the N-word. Now we add on to the crime and make it a hate crime, which means you get the punishment of whatever the arson or the battery or whatever it is, rape, whatever the crime is, and yet, what is we call it, like you know, like a bonus penalty, right? An accelerator of sorts that actually punishes you worse because in the process of committing the crime, you invoked a hateful stereotype, derogatory, bias, prejudice, discrimination that showed that your crime was animated by hate. Now, why we would make this distinction, I don't understand, right? That's what you were found confusing. If we think that it's worth, why don't we just say, look, you always get punished for the crime that you commit, but you don't get more punished because you said something during the crime. I thought we have free speech, right? So then the question is, why is it if you use the N-word while committing a robbery, there it matters, but if you use the N-word in any other context, there is no hate crime?
So, for instance, I just want to jump in real quickly with Charlottesville. Those people had the right to march and, you know, say whatever they wanted, but it didn't become criminal until the fellow who killed that woman.
Yeah.
And it's why often when you hear on the news when they're reporting what something happened, it's a moment before they said they're looking into it to see if it is a hate crime. And that can be very confusing, but I guess they have to determine what the circumstances were.
Right, because again, there's a whole, as I've explained, there's another series of statutes that apply that aggravate the original crime, right? And so that's why everyone go, well, we haven't quite made a decision for hate crime yet. So of course, that's what prosecutors do, and along with the police, to decide what animated the crime. You know, and the reason that's important is because it'll result in a much more harsh penalty. But it's not penalizing for the harm that was created from the speech itself, right? The speech is relevant only for the purposes of accenting the crime, expanding the punishment. It's not there for the speech on its own and the harm that it causes. And earlier you raise that question, and maybe now's a good time for me to answer, which is that we have a very odd First Amendment where one of the elements, the free speech clause, is tied to a nursery rhyme. What country would do that? I don't know. We do. We have a nursery rhyme that explains free speech. And what's the nursery rhyme? We tell all our kids, sticks and stones can break our bones, that names can't hurt us. Right now, we know when you tell your children this, you're lying to them. And they're not as stupid as you think. They know that sticks and stones hurt. Yeah, they know that. But they also know that the name calling hurts. They know that. And you can't convince them of that because it's ridiculous. It's true. But that's yet how the First Amendment operates. However, in the last 10 years, through advances in neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, we've learned a number of things through PET scans, MRIs, all kinds of brain science. We've learned two things. One is that, in fact, pervasive indignity, humiliation, the kinds of things we're describing through weaponized language, words, or signage, signs that say things, actually not only cause psychological harm that is measured and objective by way of neuroscience and brain scans, but guess what? Sickness, physical sickness, hypertension, heart problems, through all of this sort of pervasive attacks on what it means to be a human being and a citizen. And so, you know, that adds yet another level. If we know this to be true medically, scientifically, why don't we then say speech is a tort? It can be a crime, but it can also be a tort, right? And that you should be able to go into file a civil lawsuit on the basis that it caused me damage. Now, this raises another question about our legal system, which is we're obsessed with the body. We don't really care about the mind or the emotions, meaning what? The civil tort of the intentional infliction of emotional distress, you almost never win that. In fact, the only time I heard it was at Snyder versus Phelps, where the local jury actually awarded the father millions of dollars for emotional distress. Normally, you do not get a recovery for emotional distress in an American courtroom unless there was a physical harm first. It's the same basic idea. You witness a car accident or you're in a car accident and there's the physical component of the damages to the body, and then you can add on the infliction of emotional distress, but by itself, without bruises to the body, you never see it. Again, a very unique feature of American legal system that is simply not true in Europe.
And also, what another thing that you brought up that's also very interesting, while we're not like Europe, the Talmud actually addresses this. And I was not aware of this. I think that was very interesting, that they recognize emotional distress as that it's as bad as physical injury. So can you say a few words on that?
Yeah, I mean, the Jews that wrote the Babylonian Talmud hundreds and hundreds of years ago were way ahead of anything that happened even after the Enlightenment, way ahead of it. And they didn't have brain scans, they didn't have neuroscience, they didn't have any of that. I mean, they took the position that humiliating another human being is the equivalent of draining them of their blood. It's soul murder. Jews always knew this. It's the murdering of the soul. In fact, in the Talmud, they actually describe what happens with humiliation. That first the body face turns red, and then it goes white, an ashen face. The rabbis actually made this distinction of the concept of what it does to you initially and how it leaves you. And that's why it was treated with such, awareness that it should be recognized as both criminal and civil damages done to another human being. But again, we have a legal system that thinks that the nursery rhyme is supposed to, guide our direction of what we should tolerate in the name of speech. Now, by the way, we're all focused with COVID right now, Wendy, right? So even President Trump was really, really mad at the FDA because the Food and Drug Administration refused to release the affidavit, vaccinations earlier, right? We have government regulations because we can't just let people make drugs and send them off into the marketplace. And if you want to buy stock in a company, we have securities regulations, 33 Act, the 34 Exchange Act, the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, to regulate this marketplace of stocks and bonds. I just did an event yesterday with the Holocaust Museum in Skokie, Illinois. It's interesting, right? Because we were just talking about Skokie. I just did an event with them yesterday, about 24 hours ago, on Zoom, of course. And I said, they also have their own market there. What is it? Commodities Future Exchange Commission, coffee, orange juice, cotton. These are regulated marketplaces. For some reason, we've decided that the marketplace of ideas, the government can't be involved in at all. That is just absolutely something that cannot be regulated. It should be untrammeled, given as much liberty as possible. And the question is, well, why? Well, how do you justify that? Why, even in a free market society like the United States, do we have other industries that have safety precautions and regulations to make sure that garbage is not sold as food or drugs, right? Why is it that we don't say, well, there's some speech that's just garbage or fake? They're not ideas. They're just there to, mess with people's minds, hurt them, or create misinformation and untruth. Remember what I said before about the Founding Fathers? They were trying to advance society, not confuse people, not allow lies and misinformation. They were trying to engage in better representative democracy and democratic debate, robust, right? So the question is, why did we decide that the marketplace for ideas has no regulation at all? The seminal Supreme Court case that sort of justifies this is one from World War I called Abrams versus the United States. One of our most famous Supreme Court justices, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. It's, in my opinion, his fault. I'm good at blaming Supreme Court. It's his fault. He came up with a really good quote. It's in my mind, idiotic, but it's a quote and everybody recites it. And by the way, let me caution Tidewater people again. Be careful if you quote Thane Rosenbaum on the street, right? Because what he's saying is just lunacy. So be careful.
But Thane, this is our marketplace of ideas, so you need to be able to have your opinion.
I appreciate that, but not in a cancel culture, Wendy. Not anymore. You're not allowed. That's actually one of the reasons I wrote the book. Because on the one hand, right, we say, of course Nazis should march on Holocaust survivors. Of course the Klan could burn a cross. Of course, if you hate Muslims, you could call them all terrorists or tell them to go home to your own countries. Of course, you have the free speech right to do that. Again, founding fathers would go, what? Oh, and by the way, Snyder versus Phelps with the dead Marine. If you think that George Washington, the general of the colonial army, won this Revolutionary War, the most improbable win of all, thought that the First Amendment would let you ruin the funeral of a father and family saying goodbye to his son because they're opposed to gay service, you're out of your mind. You really think that's what George Washington believed, or General George Washington, that you can actually burn a flag in front of a family of people who just lost a son fighting for this country? No, I'm quite sure. I'm very comfortable. I know it's your state, not my business. You have better rights to George and Martha than I do. But I'm asking you, Virginians, to just think about it. Do you really think George Washington intended that? So let me just briefly tie up the marketplace of ideas. Oliver Wendell Holmes said that we have a marketplace. It's like a laissez-faire, and we welcome as much ideas because good ideas cancel out bad ideas. On the theory of, like, Adam Smith, market economies, right? To say, if I build a better toothbrush, it will knock out Oral-B, right? Eventually, you'll come to look for the Thane Rosenbaum toothbrush because it's better. And eventually Oral-B will go out of business, right? You know, people believe stuff like this, and maybe it works in the marketplace, right? Computer companies that got folded or got bought out by other computer companies, perfect sense of laissez-faire market capitalism. But that doesn't work in the marketplace ideas. And let me give you the best example of that. Nazis. Nazis is my exhibit A about the fallacy of the marketplace ideas. Why? Well, because didn't we already settle that argument in 1945?
We thought we had.
Yeah, wasn't that done? Didn't the Nuremberg trials that literally in some cases executed those who committed crimes against humanity, that ideology has been fully discredited and defeated? Why are they still here? Why? Because the market of ideas doesn't cancel them out. Everyone continues to be welcome. Any burp out of the mouth of a lunatic is called speech and a potential idea. And we're afraid to say, no, that's not speech and that's not an idea. And we're very comfortable saying that. You got a problem with affirmative action? Write an op-ed. Don't burn crosses on people's families' lawn, right? Don't commit arson. Don't scare the crap out of their children. No, you got a problem. I know you can't spell, but write an op-ed in a newspaper about why you think affirmative action should come to an end.
And, you know, to that point, another place that where there should be many, the free expression of ideas and lots of discourse is college campuses.
Yes.
And that sort of speaks to your mention of cancel culture. That has gone crazy. And can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe comment on what you feel, if that is possible to even check, because these are individuals who are our future, essentially. And if our future is that, perhaps we're in trouble.
Yeah, we are. Thank you for bringing me to that point, because you're really gifted at this. It's a perfect time to discuss the reason sort of the book makes sense today. Why is this book important today? Why should everybody in Virginia read this? Is because the First Amendment free speech clause is confusing. It should be. If you gave it some thought and you sit down and you go, wait a minute, Thane Rosenbaum just said that you can burn a cross on an African-American's lawn. But Wendy just said that if you're on a college campus, you can't criticize Black Lives Matter, right? In 3 different universities, I hope everybody is sitting. Wendy, you're sitting.
I am.
In 3 universities, Stanford, UCLA, those are pretty good schools, by the way. And the New School for Social Research, not well known, but it's here in New York City. 3 professors over the last, I think 6 months to a year, I can't remember, but it's within the last year, were reprimanded and almost relieved of their positions. Why? because they each used the N-word in class. The first professor read from Martin Luther King's letter to a Birmingham jail. The second professor, quoted James Baldwin, an essay of James Baldwin, the great African-American essayist. And a third quoted from a rap song. I don't know what to say.
And those were the original documents. It wasn't.
Yes. Yeah. The words were used. The words are from African Americans, and these, at least I can't speak for the rap song, but James Baldwin letter from a Birmingham. I have to tell you, one of my books actually has the letter in it. It's a collection of writing. So I'm sure I'm a racist. I'm a racist anywhere. Everything I've just said is racist. But I'm sure I'm a racist for copying Martin Luther King's letter as an example of great writing about the law. It was Thane Rosenbaum's greatest hits about the great writing about the law. I included the letter from the Birmingham jail, and I know now that if I spoke it out loud in a certain campuses, I would be reprimanded. And I'm sure someone's watching this who will now have something on the internet about how I'm a racist, because I actually included the N-word in Martin Luther King's letter that he wrote. He wrote it, not me. He wrote it, and it's an important piece. It's an important document. These are examples, right? So you can, the neo-Nazis can march on Hamlet of Holocaust survivors, but Thane Rosenbaum, who's a pro-Israel speaker, will get shouted down on virtually every single campus around the United States. And how do you know that? Because I have been shouted down virtually every campus around the United States. I know what that's like. I was shouted down at Berkeley, right? That's even unbelievable. The birthplace of the free speech movement wouldn't allow me to speak favorably about Israel. So yeah, the campuses are very different. Media is very different. We saw what happened with the New York Times and the publication just recently of Senator Tom Cotton. He's somewhat of a neighboring southern state, Arkansas. I don't know if you remember what happened, but This to me was really a low, you guys are tide water, high tide. This is the low tide. This is the low point, in my view, for American journalism. I'm mortified. If I worked for the New York Times professionally, I would just hold my head down in utter shame. They published an op-ed by a United States senator who took the position that in the aftermath of some of the Black Lives Matters protests, many of which was peaceful, but some resulted in looting and vandalism and violence, that the National Guard or the military should be brought in to quell the violence. There's a statute that permits that. It's not martial law, it permits it. Guess when it was used, since you're Southerners? It was used to help integrate the universities and schools in the Deep South in the 1960s. Remember, Mississippi, students being enrolled in school, they needed the National Guard to protect them. My view, if you think about the Insurrection Act, it's used to protect African Americans. That's my memory for why it's there. He said, well, yeah, but the insurrection also should be used to quell the violence. 62% of the United States Americans, when polled, said they agree with that. The New York Times published the op-ed, then they disavowed it. They said it was filled with mistakes. They were apologizing, they should have never. Half of the staff threatened to quit. They fired or reassigned staffers who published it. The head of the op-ed section was forced to resign. Really? A United States senator? And what was the reason for that? Purportedly, the publication of that op-ed endangered the lives of African Americans who live in the New York Times. I will leave you with that. I don't know how that worked. I don't understand how their lives were endangered. It's too absurd to say with a straight face. But so what you're saying is on campus, Wendy, it's not just on campuses. It's in major media. It's at museums. I was quoted recently in what apparently was a controversial thing that happened. And I'm sure these people in Florida will be very mad at me for promoting this. But just a few weeks ago, I was quoted in some article because someone asked me to say that there was a Black Lives Matter exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in Orlando. By the way, I've spoken there before. It's a lovely place. But they have an exhibit on Black Lives Matter, and apparently there's a whole George Floyd section, right? A martyr of the civil rights movement. I don't think he is. I can't imagine that anyone puts him in the same category of Martin Luther King or James Meredith or you know, but anyway, this is the world in which we live. And so this became a controversy for the Jewish community of Orlando because the museum was being used in a particularly misapplied way. So there's an example of the way even the Holocaust was being treated as a way to sort of leverage this sort of new racial justice movement. So it's like, you know, not in the same spirit of knocking down statues. Yes, I wrote the book because some of these things are absolutely in conflict. You shout down pro-Israel speakers, but you can march on Holocaust survivors, right? You can march on Holocaust survivors. Facebook allows for Holocaust denial sites. The Europeans do not. YouTube will let you teach you how to make a bomb in your kitchen. That's what the Boston Marathoners learned in their mother's kitchen. You can't do it in Europe. You can't turn on YouTube to learn how to make a bomb and engage in acts of terrorism or terrorist propaganda or just pure hate crimes. Like, why do we do this? At the same time, Wendy, you're right. There's the hypocrisy, right? There's some places where you have maximized free speech with no censorship. And in some capacities, you can't say anything. You can't say the words black on black crime. You can't be critical of the Black Lives Matter movement. You can't have anything to say about the LGBT movement. You just can't. That's interesting to me. You can't say anything about anything in any way questioning any decisions within the civil rights struggle of the LGBT movement. By the way, I believe in a lot of that. But you can ruin the funeral of a dead Marine who's not even gay by saying God hates fags? So I understand that's okay. The father ended up paying legal fees for that. But God forbid in a university you say something that's seen as homophobic. Those concepts are very much in conflict. So we don't seem to understand fully what the First Amendment means. I wrote this book in part because I think there's an incredible amount of confusion, right? Why is it that the Muhammad cartoons caused violence around the world? So much so that the University of Yale Press, when they published a book about the controversy of the Muhammad cartoons from Denmark and Paris, they didn't include any of the cartoons because they were afraid someone would blow up Yale or the Yale Library. Yet, the Book of Mormon plays to sold out houses all over the United States. I understand. And so why is that? I don't understand.
So moving forward, you know, in your book, you lay out all of this in very digestible nuggets. What is your vision for trying to check this? Or is there something as citizens we can do? You know, on the you know, sort of on the front lines of this, is there a way to keep this from ballooning out even more than it has?
Well, you know, the point that you said earlier that I liked, and I don't think other moderator made this point before, so thank you. Oh. You said, well, this is a problem. Students are going to graduate, and this is their understanding of free speech. That's what you said. I heard you say that. You said, how's that going to work? These are kids that went to college, and they were told that you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say this. There are microaggressions, there are safe spaces, there are trigger warnings, and you just can't. You're not allowed to. You're a racist, and it's not just that you're wrong. Remember, we don't allow for friendly disagreement. Again, the founders would be shocked. They didn't realize that if you said the word Donald Trump, or if you said the word Black Lives Matter, or if you said the word Israel, you would be shouted down or be thrown out of a Shabbat dinner. If, God forbid, you defended Israel or said something nice about Donald Trump or made a comment of something about Black lives, that's it. You are an absolute racist. You do not exist to us. Your children can't play in our house anymore. It's not that we disagree with you. You are morally repugnant. This is not what our founding fathers thought. They just thought, they would think,
so is there a way to shift the culture a little bit? I mean, I know in the book, you do talk about, I apologize, can't remember the case, but you actually, where there was this crazy ruling and you said, yeah, they could have done this and it wouldn't have been as extreme. I guess it's very hard to shift a culture. I mean, that's a monumental task.
Yeah, that's why I'm here to sort of identify the problem and to sort of give everyone context of what free speech means, what it has meant historically, and in the way that it has been, you know, in my mind, the concept has been transgressed and completely upended. I don't know what the solution is because I used to think that you were wrong. I used to think, as a faculty member, I used to think that Wendy was wrong because when kids graduate high school, college, and then all of a sudden they got a mortgage, you know, they stop believing in stupid things. You know, they stop. They stop in college. I know this because I've been a faculty member. They listen to faculty members, most of whom are morons, and no one should be listening to most faculty members. You really shouldn't. It's not a good idea. That's not where you should get your advice on how to live your life. Most faculty members never leave the building. They don't really know anything. They've never served in the military. Nothing bad has ever happened to them. It's very smug and very easy for them to say the word racist and this Zionist, you know. So believe me, this is welcome to Thane's world. I've seen this enough. I know what I'm talking about. Your kids have been brainwashed by college. So one of the reasons I've been saying around the country, stop giving money to some of these colleges. Stop. Anti-Israel schools, if they're allowing BDS images, call the president and say, I'm sorry, that's it. You're dead to me. Fix the place. If you think you're a liberal arts college, then act like a liberal institution, not an illiberal institution. Until you do, you will never see any money from me, right? Stop giving them money. I mean, look, I don't know the end game because it's, again, I didn't think you were right. You are right. When students left universities and started taking jobs in the media and started to impose the same kind of twisted, creepy, weird, illiberal, almost fascistic rules of what you say and not say, where newspapers now don't report objective facts, but they simply give you their bias and force you to believe that this is the moral truth. Right, that networks, cable shows, they're not there to give you the news. They literally are there to give you a moral point of view that you must adopt. And if you fail to adopt, it demonstrates your moral failing. I didn't think this would happen, Wendy, to the media, to museums. I thought it was something that it was confined to universities. I would say, look, this is my life. Unfortunately, it's my life. But thank God the rest of the country won't see it unless you work in a university. So I don't know really what they look. I hope there'll be a cultural backlash. Maybe there will. There are people who believe that there will be one day come a backlash against all of these rules that have been imposed. And again, the kinds of rules that are so illiberal that they defy the founding fathers' understanding of why, your first question, why give Americans the feeling that they have this liberty? What's the benefit? What's the goodness that comes from a free speech liberty? It's not to shut each other up. It's not to shout each other down. It's not to impose only one point of view. Here's something I've been telling people over the last few months. When was the last time you were in a conversation where you said something or they said something and you really disagree with it? But instead of saying you are a horrible human being and no good should ever come to you, you say the following things. I hadn't considered it that way before. I don't think I agree with it. I'm going to take that back with me for a few days, mull it over. I don't think I'm going to ever agree with it, but thank you for that perspective. I haven't heard anyone say anything like that anymore. Nobody.
Well, maybe that is the first step, is to just change how we speak to each other.
Yes.
I mean, you can't change people's minds sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, also the acceptance of, what a true, when people say, I'm, given my writings, people think I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a liberal Democrat, just to be clear. I've been a human rights professor for nearly 30 years. How can I possibly be a racist? Why am I a racist? Because I'm a Zionist. Well, then obviously you're a racist, right? I think it's important to actually talk about black on black crime. you're a racist, right? I think it's important to talk about the relationship between the Quran and Islam and terrorism. You're a racist. No, I think these are important ideas that should and can be discussed and should not result in moral banishment. A liberal, people forgot what this means. Liberal, Wendy, means to be open. That's what it means, to be liberal in your mind, in your thought, capable of holding in two, here's my hands up here. Here's an idea and here's an idea, and I will give this some thought and render my own judgment without, destroying other people, canceling other people, trying to get other people fired for having an opinion that I disagree with. And that's what a liberal is. That's why what liberals today are not liberals. They're illiberal. They're progressives. Let's not confuse it. The liberalism that passes for liberal democracy today is the world of Bernie Sanders and AOC. There's nothing liberal. John Locke would be shocked by AOC. I mean, literally, frankly, we should all be shocked by this bartender who is now the leader of the left. But part of it is because that world is very, very judgmental, very condemning, very bitter about things conversations that simply cannot be had. And I would say, well, then stop saying we have the First Amendment. Stop using the word free speech so liberally, because you don't really mean it. You don't mean it in the way the Founding Fathers understood it. You're saying, I like free speech as long as you're free to agree with me. Of course, you're very free to agree with everything I just said. But if I hear one word out of you that suggests that you have some ambivalence about what I said, you are a horrible human being. And that's why I wrote this book.
Well, and it's good to read the facts. I mean, it kind of gets, I think what you laid out in your book so well was the history, the background. And I think people they need to read the Constitution every once in a while. One of my favorite stories is, as part of the Holocaust Commission, we do a lot with social studies teachers. And we were at the National Convention a few years ago. And one of the speakers was the outgoing president. And she pulled it out of her purse. She carried a pocket Constitution with her at all times.
Love it.
And perhaps that's what we all need to start doing, because I think often people don't go back to the source material. Unfortunately, we're about out of time.
Can I just add one point to Wendy's point there? Because it's a good one. In the book, I give you even better source material than the Constitution. The letters that Madison and other founding fathers wrote to each other as they were drafting, not just the Federalist Papers, but actual personal correspondence. Mm-hmm. And each of the letters, Wendy, it's very interesting. When they talked about free speech, they all said the same thing, but not if it conflicts with the rights of others.
And
right? They understood that it doesn't cancel out my right to citizenship, my right to equality, my right to be able to go outside with my children without being, treated like a Jew who should be, in the gas chambers. Let me just say, in France, there's a comedian. His name is Umbala Dudonné. He's very well known in Europe, but he spends a lot of time in jail. Why? He gets up at comedy stores all throughout Europe, and he says the following words: don't you think we should have the gas chambers back again? Don't you think that we should bring back the crematory? Let me give you a list of some of the people, Jews, who should belong back in the gas chambers. And you know what happens? The police come, they take him off the stage, and they arrest him. Here, he would be a First Amendment god.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It is crazy. Well, thank you so much. This has been really informative and a nice jumping off point from your book. And I hope that people will look into the book if they haven't already. Enjoyed talking to you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think you covered just about all the big points.
You would know. You read it.
I read it, and my list of questions is done. So thank you again, and good luck moving forward. And I hope that everyone listening, perhaps we take a page from this, and the next time we're in a let's say, a strained discourse, we do take a beat and listen.
Civility.
Don't respond. And yeah, we return to civility. And that is one of the things that both the CRC Anti-Hate Committee as well as the Holocaust Commission, that's a huge tenet for us, and that we often we invoke all the time. But it, sometimes it gets lost in all of the chatter. So anyway, thank you so much again, Thane, and hopefully one day you will come back in person. So before we go, I have a few. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you haven't already purchased a book and you'd like to, please consider supporting independent bookstores, especially Prince Books in downtown Norfolk. And I also want to remind you that you can also register for some upcoming events. The next one we have coming up is actually kind of a nice bookend to this. And it's also sponsored by the Anti-Hate Task Force and the Holocaust Commission. On Tuesday, January 12th at noon, we're going to be talking to Susan Nossel, who's the author of Dare to Speak, Defending Free Speech for All. She has another take on the First Amendment, and I think she'll add a lot to this conversation. And then on January 12th at noon, we are welcoming back Dr. Michael Roizen, who is the author of What to Eat When, and he now has a cookbook. And last time when he was here in person, they actually were turning people away at the door. So with Zoom, everybody who wants to can attend this event. And so I highly recommend him. He is a great speaker and really makes science fun. And then last but not least, the Florence Melton Mini School is returning to our community starting January 7th. And if you go to jewishva.org/KCL, you can learn more. It's a series of classes that is with different instructors from around the community. And again, we appreciate your participation. Happy Hanukkah. And we look forward to seeing you at some of our January events. Thank you.